Welcome to Mystara for another remaster. I've been putting this one off the longest because it's probably the beefiest of them all. Red Steel, the Savage Coast sourcebook, the third major setting addition to Mystara after the Known World and the Hollow World. This is the one that many people remember for its just off-the-wall gonzo rules. The one with the superpowers, the 3 curses, the mutations, the mandatory magical drug addiction, French dogs, Cockney cats, 4 Spains, lots of guns, and the second edition rules. It's a mixed bag, but it was the setting that kicked Mystara to the second edition. The continuity is particularly egregious, which is saying a lot for a Mystara supplement, and a good chunk of the book feels half-finished. But other people love it because it's one of the most original takes of any D&D game world. I'm Mr. Welch, and today you've got red on you. First, which director would you pick if you had to make a D&D movie? George Miller could do wonders with the apocalyptic hellscape that is Dark Sun. Peter Jackson could turn Dragonlance into another sweeping effort if the studios didn't jack with him. I used to say Luc Besson could do wonders with the weirdness of Planescape, but he's getting a little creepy in the last few years, so let's give that one to Guillermo del Toro. Richard Donner, with his ability to tell grand tales, would have been incredible for the grim realism of Greyhawk, but sadly we lost him recently. Let's go with Johan Rink, the guy that gave us Chernobyl. The Forgotten Realms would be perfect for Taika Waititi, because neither of them knows when to stop adding story elements. But if you love David Cronenberg, then Red Steel is for you. It was a box set released in 1994 for the second edition of D&D. As I mentioned, Tim Beach was the lead designer and is centered around a cluster of small nations trapped inside of a region suffering from 3 interlocked curses. Everyone inside this region had a special power called Legacy, but the power also caused a mutation, and only constant contact with the mineral cinnabryl could stop the mutation from spreading. Worse, cinnabryl would get used up gradually in this manner, so you had to keep replacing it. The effects of Legacies also turned everyone a dark red as a side effect, without exception. So at least racism was solved. The end result was a blighted region where everyone enjoyed random special abilities but was also addicted to a magical mineral, or else they would mutate to death. Not the best place to plan a vacation. The origin of the 3 curses is important and only partially connected to each other. The people behind the curses are your usual suspects: Nithians, Araneans, and Man-Scorpions. The Nithians started experimenting with giving regular creatures magical powers to use as a weapon because Nithians never saw a creature they didn't think they couldn't improve with body-warping magic that went against all laws of decency. That created the Legacies and the cinnabryl. When the Nithians vanished, the Man-Scorpions took up their cause, even if they couldn't remember the Nithians, and proceeded to betray and drive out the Induks, the flying minotaurs, who had sheltered them during a great catastrophe. The Immortals took umbrage to this bit of treason and added mutations to the Legacy, and then made the cinnabryl mandatory to avoid the spread. The Aranea decided they didn't want the Wallara, the Chameleon Men, to know the secret about them being secret spider folk, and used a spell to wipe that from their memory. And they also wiped out every bit of Wallara's knowledge regarding science and technology back to the Stone Age. The Chameleon Men forgot how to forge weapons, make glass, or how letters work. Their patron, the Great One, the Lord of Dragons, expressed his displeasure with this by taking the term Scorched Earth quite literally. Every dragon remotely close to the nation of Harath descended upon it, leaving no stone on stone. Other immortals finally stepped in to stop the most one-sided war in history, and though the few Aranea that remained were spared, the Great One spilled magical dragon blood all over the entire region, making the vermeil dust that coats everything. It also makes divination magic almost impossible, as everything registers as magical. This acted as a link to all the curses, making everyone a mutated semi-magical abomination addicted to cinnabryl. Welcome to the Savage Coast. This region comprises 6 whole nations and a host of smaller domains known as the Savage Baronies. It creates one of the biggest problems in the setting, and that's the location of the Red Curse. According to the Player's Guide, the Red Curse spans the entire region, from the Savage Baronies to the east to the Kingdom of Belane at the furthest western part. The issue is that in the Dungeon Master's Guide, also in the same box set, the Red Curse only covers parts of the Savage Baronies. It's not mentioned at all in any of the other nations. In a few nations, it specifically says they aren't in those cursed regions, in direct contradiction to the map. It's up to you to decide if you want to use the Red Curse in the western nations. I prefer to keep it in the Baronies, but that's just me. The western nations start with the Aranea homeland of Harath, the shape-changing Aranea, so nobody knows they're spiders. The Kingdom of Belane is filled with British-themed Rakasta, so bring tea to appease them. Le Rayon de Ranadi is where you find French Lupin, which surprisingly aren't entirely poodles. Uzdri is one of the 2 barbarian kingdoms, at least that's what they call themselves, and they are based on the Germanic League before Charlemagne. Lastly, you've got the obviously Frankish Confederated Kingdom of Robrin. The Savage Baronies are all based on Spanish or Portuguese-influenced nations, and they're most famous for having Spain represented 4 times, with each nation a different part of Spanish history. The Baronies have been a source of constant conflict since their founding by the Ispan people of Thyatis, who were never mentioned before or after in any book in Mystara at all. I even made a video about that. The baronies are Villaverde, representing 16th century Portugal, Texeiras, representing 17th century Portugal, and not Texas, that comes later. Torreon is Conquistador Spain, Narvaez is Inquisitorial Spain, Saragon is Moorish Spain, Almiron is the Potici region in Peru under Spanish rule before Bolivia split away. Cimarron's Texas, so bring your hog legs. Garona is Renaissance Spain, and Guadalante is obviously Argentina with the Gauchos. These are all given in greater detail in the Savage Baronies box set, which, again, I detailed in another video in this series. One complaint about Red Steel is how it handles the different races. All the demi-humans are hand-waved as having the same cultures as the humans in the nations. The elves, dwarves, and Hin have already completely assimilated and given up any and all of their racial culture and have decided to become Spanish, or Argentinian, or Portuguese, or Texan. This makes all the various demi-humans humans with varying heights, body hair, and love of rock climbing. There are no elven or dwarven enclaves, they live next door to the humans and everybody's happy with it. The Mystara setting was dying at this point, so the desire to put much effort into the products might have been low. Because this is 2nd edition, D&D half-elves were introduced for the first time, contradicting previously established lore. I devised the solution of the Ralda, a race created by the Red Curse, that are half-elves mechanically but didn't change the original lore established in the Alfheim book. The book also details the Lizardman lands, consisting of Shazak, Ator, and Kay. Regular Lizardmen populate the first one, then Gatormen, and finally the Caymen, or in their tongue, Shazak, Gorash, and Kamas, or Kamas. The Lizardmen live in the region, not bothering anybody until the Harathians needed several unpaid interns for biological research. They wanted to make the perfect unpaid intern race and thought the Lizardmen would be great at this task once they were properly modified. Their first attempt created the Kamas, which were much smaller but with increased intelligence and even bigger egos. They refused to work for free and completely missed the concept of unpaid interns. Thus, the Gorash were created, which were far larger than the Lizardmen, but also dimmer at the same time. They didn't like being told what to do and proved too savage and uncontrollable to learn how to work the copy machine. Both the Kamas and Gorash were released into the wild, where they claimed part of the Lizardmen's territory. Now, the 3 cycle between uneasy peace and all-out war only spills out into other lands. More than anything else, Red Steel is known for their curse. The rules regarding it are pretty detailed and more than a bit random. Some of the powers you can obtain are incredible. Others are almost useless. It's a random roll based on where your character is from. The contradictions between the 2 source books don't help this. The Red Curse is divided into regions, determining the chart you roll on. When you make your character, roll your d20 on the appropriate chart, and that's your power. It can be as powerful as wings sprouting out your back and you can fly. Or you can know a bonus language for a minute. Some let you cast specific spells like Enlarge or Strength. Others give you combat bonuses if you are a fighter. Or if you are a fighter, just +2 to hit. There's no rhyme or reason, there's no balance at all. You roll the dice, you take your chances. With every ability, of course, there is a disability. It's part of the curse. When you get your special power, you also get the downside. If you don't use cinnabryl, then you mutate, and your downside physically manifests. If you have the flight power, giant wings sprout from your back and stay there. The translate power causes you to change into random species, though you get none of the racial abilities. Most of the drawbacks far outweigh the benefits you get from your legacy, so remember to keep your cinnabryl ready. If you don't do this, things get much worse. The worst part is that every legacy has an ability tied to it. When your legacy manifests, you lose a point from that ability. It's unavoidable. As long as you have a legacy, it stays gone. You can't remove your legacy if you remained in the curse region. If you don't have cinnabryl, you lose another 2d4 points from the ability. If that ability hits 0, you die. Doesn't matter which one it was, it's part of the curse. If you leave the region, nothing happens for a number of days equal to your constitution. Then your legacy activates at maximum power and you have to make a saving throw. Failing, it reduces you to 1 hit point and you pass out for 1d4 hours. After that, your lost ability scores return except for the point you lost initially. If you're mutated, that's not cured either. The red skin returns to normal in about a year. To permanently get rid of the curse, ultimately you need a name level or higher cleric to cast Remove Curse. Now if you head back to the cursed region, you get a new curse and start the process again. The only way to stop the mutation from spreading is by having cinnabryl against your flesh, typically in the form of an amulet. This prevents the physical mutation and stat loss, and all the nasty stuff is delayed while you wear it. The downside is the curse depletes the cinnabryl, so a standard amulet will wear out in a week. Wearing 2 amulets wears them down equally, so you use up both in 2 weeks. Cinnabryl, fortunately, is a common mineral in several regions, but the people who don't live in those regions are often forced to live with the results of their legacy. These people are called the Afflicted and are seen with pity. Reversing the mutation requires a Remove Curse spell, but the process will repeat itself unless the unfortunate soul can obtain cinnabryl. Amulets come in a standard size and weight. Unscrupulous merchants will try to mix the cinnabryl with other minerals, but that screws with the weight, which is a dead giveaway. For this reason, many people in the Savage Baronies carry a small scale when they purchase amulets from people they don't know. Skimming cinnabryl from buyers is a great way to become the subject of mob justice. And cinnabryl is only the most famous of the various magical substances unique to the Savage Coast. Vermeil is the red dust that coats everything, making detection spells useless. It's harmless, which is fortunate because it's almost impossible not to breathe in the stuff. It's the reason behind everyone's red skin tone. When cinnabryl is depleted, it becomes red steel, the namesake of the setting. This mineral is easy to work with, lighter than steel, and holds an edge better than most metals. Weapons made with it act as a +0 weapon. Nothing to hit or damage, but it can hit things that normally require magic. It can also be made into armor, which will adjust if your body contorts because of your legacy. The danger is outside the cursed region, the metal becomes toxic, so you don't want to wear your red steel plate mail in Darraken. Crimson Essence is a magical concoction created with vermeil and other chemicals. This potion will grant you a second legacy when imbibed, though only temporarily. It does give the group known as the Inheritors permanent magical legacies, which is their biggest secret, and the one they are more than willing to kill to preserve. Steel Seed is cinnabryl, which is naturally depleted on its own. How this happens is a mystery, as cinnabryl typically only degrades in contact with flesh. It's a brittle metallic substance only used in alchemical formulas. The most famous use for it is to make smoke powder. Red steel loves its guns. This is a magical gunpowder, not like the Blackmore era gunpowder. Firearms using smoke powder count as +0 magical weapons and have very bad effects on Inheritors. Smoke powder is rare outside the Savage Baronies, but is commonplace in Cimarron County. 'Cause it's Texas, get it? The reason why the rest of the world isn't flooded with red steel items is because of the Inheritors, who are a major faction in the region. They used to be different merchant guilds in the past until they figured out the link between the curse and cinnabryl. Then they made it their mission to corner the market on the one thing that arrests the spread of the curse. They bought up every cinnabryl mine they could back in the day and are in charge of manufacturing the amulets. They have the power to gain additional legacies through the Crimson Essence, though exactly how is unknown. They are tolerated in all regions of the Red Curse, except for Cimarron due to disagreements over the use of smoke powder. They would normally embargo the nation, except Cimarron is one of the area's richest in cinnabryl, making such an action ineffective. Being 2nd edition, you have class kits, which were kind of a watered-down subclass for your characters. That's not the best description, but kits were known for being absolutely all over the place in terms of power, some of which gave you a few minor role-playing options, like the local hero, and others completely rewrote how you played, like the Inheritor in this case. The kit pushes you heavily towards more swashbuckling combat, though the rules unfortunately don't reflect this. A swashbuckler kit gets a -2 to armor class if they aren't wearing anything heavier than leather armor, making them relatively easy to hit compared to the Frankish knight in full plate. It does give the rules for Lupin, Rakasta, Tortles, and Aranea. Well, some of the rules, or maybe half of the rules, already gives you the stat modifiers, class restrictions, and nothing else. No racial abilities at all, and all these races include shape-changing spiders. There are no rules for Lupins detecting lycanthropes, no rules for Tortles pulling their heads inside their shells, or for any of the races at all. At first I thought the information was in another part of the book, and they just split up the rules. They do have the advanced rules, but they're in the monster section, which is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, while the character creation rules are in the Player's Guide. And even then, the rules in the Monster's Guide are written in a roundabout way, which makes it very difficult to understand exactly what you can do. And those were clunky as hell, like the Lupin's reaction to Wolfbane as a poison depended on whether it was ingested or injected. The box set does give you instructions on how to lift the 3 curses, which will be the focus of an entire campaign. The problem is that 2 of the curses are immortal in nature, and a third involves the culture whose memory has been wiped from the planet. If you wanted to get rid of the vermeil, you need to talk to the Great One. Ixion has to be persuaded to remove the cinnabryl addiction from the legacies. The Nithians are the only ones that can remove the legacies and stop the mutations. It would probably be better to achieve this task as an immortal, but 2nd edition never had rules for immortals, making that route trickier. Red Steel was an interesting concept, but it was crippled by the writing. Different authors in the same box set contradicted the lore of the Red Coast. It wanted to be similar to a Zorro setting, but 2nd edition doesn't support light fighters in general. A -2 to a bad armor class makes it a slightly less worse armor class. It handwaves demi-human cultures, completely removing what made elves and dwarves different from humans. The unbalanced legacy system doesn't work mechanically, even when they tried to convert it to 3rd edition. People loved the concept of the legacies, but most will admit they weren't that playable. It was an interesting concept, don't get me wrong. Despite my somewhat negative take on Red Steel, I'm not faulting the writers for the end result. It was a product of its time, and the mid-90s were not a very good time for Mystara. You've got a new edition that doesn't mesh with the previous books. The new edition contradicts large portions of canon, and the mechanics are a poor fit for the entire concept. Add the rushed or gimmicky nature of TSR 90's box set, and the problem becomes apparent. It might have worked if it had more time to cook, with a proper line and continuity editor. People are mixed on Red Steel, with most thinking that it was a nice idea, but it wasn't good for 2nd edition. That wraps up Red Steel. It was a product of 2nd edition Mystara. It had a CD with questionable sound effects and music we really don't like to talk about. The art didn't hold up to the older TSR art. It was the 3rd version of the setting, retconning the retcon of the original version of the Savage Coast module. The Princess art version had no curse. The firearms were 6-shot hand crossbows. Much changed as it went full gonzo, but the concepts didn't work with the rule set they had to work with. You can find the box set still in shrink if you look hard enough. Sometimes you can get it for less price. It wasn't the best-selling box set in the late TSR days. The DM's Guild has a PDF version with the audio tracks from the CD for $5. Next up on the remaster list is Saber River, one of the most railroady modules and possibly the one that gives out the most gold in TSR history. Seriously, 2 million gold pieces if you can find all the treasure. Until then, keep your powder dry.